Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast. Getting rid of bovine TB, a new strategy commissioned by the government, says that cattle vaccination is the answer. The science is ready, it just needs the will.
It is going to be a bumpy ride, but we'll get there on time if we've got the guts.
First, though, this week we're looking at cereals. Tomorrow, Charlotte will be at the annual cereals event, which is at Jeremy Clarkson's farm this year. With the current pressures on cereal farming, such as high fertiliser and fuel costs and an unusually hot and dry spring, finding more hardy and efficient varieties of cereals has become vital. The agricultural research organisation NIAB has been running a trial to do exactly this. Theo White went to meet Nathan Morris, who oversees the project in Norfolk, near Wymondham.
We're standing in front of a small plot that's 2 metres by 6 metres, and we drill each variety on that scale. So then we basically have a record of which variety is in each plot.
It's amazing. It's almost like the grid system of a European or American city. It's these streets of perfectly separated plots of wheat.
We ascribe whether it's a high nitrogen or a low nitrogen plot, and in our case our research is looking at a low rate of nitrogen of 50 kilos of nitrogen per hectare. Farmers typically would put on around about 220, and that difference in the high and low rates allow us to tease out how these lines perform at a given nitrogen level.
These ones actually look a little bit lighter green and a little bit almost stunted compared with their neighbours. So I know you're going to have to crunch all the numbers and do this scientifically, but talk to me about what you're seeing.
The low nitrogen we do actually see, as you described, we see pale leaves that are going a little bit yellowing on their tips, and that's a symptom of nitrogen deficiency. But yes, it's looking a little bit stressed.
So the point essentially of this research, the goal is to find your stressed crop like this, but then find the one that deals the best under pressure, as it were.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, certainly under the lower nitrogen levels, it will be stressed. It will be putting greater pressure on that plant. And that's, as you say, very interesting to look at, to see under those stressed conditions which particular varieties are increasing our performance, both in terms of yield, grain quality, and from that data we can look at the nitrogen use efficiency. And obviously the more nitrogen we can get into the crop, and the better that can then be utilised.
I suppose at the moment there must be a lot of interest in your work. I mean, nitrogen prices have gone up, fertiliser prices have gone up because of the situation in the Middle East.
You could almost call it a perfect storm, because you've got the cost of the actual input and those factors behind what's driving that increase in cost. You've also got the change in environmental climatic conditions. So in the UK we've experienced the last 2 years have been some of the driest on record, and that really challenges how the crop can utilise nitrogen. It requires rain to wash, to solubilise it, to make it available to the crop. So that's really two key factors that we want to look at. How can we, make it as efficient as possible?
Talk to me about the end of the process and the project's future.
So yeah, that's a very interesting question, and actually some of this research is quite fundamental to the direction that the industry may have to go in with these increasing costs and the environmental and other drivers and pressures on producing our food essentially. And so we're very fortunate that because this is a long-term piece of work, we have an agricultural charity that funds this work, the Morley Agricultural Foundation and the JC Mann Trust. They're two agricultural charities, and they have a longer term view. So it won't be next year that this will influence what a grower will do, but it will hopefully inform the breeders and the wider industry on some of the considerations that we might need to take, and then allow growers to adapt.
Nathan Morris from NIAB. A cattle vaccine to protect livestock from bovine TB could be in use on farms in England by 2030. Well, that's one of the aims outlined in a new government-commissioned strategy for the eradication of bovine TB, which has been released today. In a moment, we'll hear from the farmer who chairs the steering group behind the strategy. But first, Heather Simons is with me to remind us about the disease and its impact.
Hi, Anna. Yes, bovine TB is a disease which costs taxpayers in England about £100 million a year and costs the farming sector an estimated £75 million extra. Prevalence of the disease in cattle herds in England has dropped off over the last decade, but still 20,000 cattle from English farms were slaughtered last year because of it, and the financial and emotional toll it takes on farmers is significant. Efforts to tackle it so far have included strict testing regimes and restrictions on farms where it's detected, the compulsory culling of infected animals, and of course, the highly controversial culling of badgers. That started in 2013 and is now coming to an end.
So what is in this new recommended strategy?
Yeah, so this document, commissioned by DEFRA, is the result of a collaboration between farming groups, scientists and government officials. It's been recommended to government as a way of eradicating BTB in England by 2038. The strategy highlights how most bovine TB spreads between cattle, rather than from badgers to cattle. Essentially, if the disease is undetected, it can spread silently within a herd and then spread around the country when cattle are moved. And that happens because the current test doesn't always identify infected animals. So this strategy focuses on trying to crack down on that cattle-to-cattle transmission, with stricter movement restrictions and increased testing, but also things like giving farmers more access to data around TB infections and the freedom to use different types of TB test, some of which are more sensitive. It also includes the introduction of a cattle vaccine, and I'll come back to that in a bit more detail in a moment. The strategy also looks at the disease outside of cattle, primarily in badgers. It says that though most herds are infected by other cattle, a small proportion of herds are infected by badgers. Where previously badgers were culled, there will now be an expansion of badger vaccination programmes in high priority areas. And the aim is for more surveillance of TB in both badgers and deer.
So let's have a little bit more information about this cattle vaccine. I mean, it has been a bit of a holy grail and something I've been talking about on the programme for maybe decades. Why has it taken so long?
Yeah, it has been a long time coming. And there is a vaccine, the BCG vaccine, and studies have shown it's pretty effective at protecting animals from BTB and can also significantly reduce transmission. But it's not as simple as that, because the TB tests that are currently used can't tell the difference between an infected animal and a vaccinated one. Now, a new test has been developed called the DIVA test, which can tell the difference. And the Animal and Plant Health Agency has been trialling the combination of the DIVA test and this BCG vaccine on 11 farms across England and Wales since 2021. Those field trials are scheduled to finish this year, and the government has already submitted an application to the Veterinary Medicines Directorate for the licensing of the cattle BCG. Now, that will excite quite a few people, but there is still another hurdle, and that's because the vaccine is currently banned in lots of other countries, including the EU, for example. And unless something changes on that, that would prevent us from being able to export any cattle products there.
Heather Simons, thank you very much. Well, as we said, these are recommendations which the government now has to assess. In its response, DEFRA said the proposed measures represent a step change in cross-sector collaboration and a new determination to eradicate this disease. It says it'll now consider the recommendations and set out next steps in due course. The National Farmers Union also gave its response. It said bovine TB continues to devastate farming families and their herds. That's why this strategy is so important, and we back its goal of building on the progress achieved so far. We now need some real urgency behind its delivery. Well, John Cross is a farmer and chair of the steering group for the government's bovine TB partnership for England.
If you roll out immunity in the cattle herd, then the whole game changes. A cow is 15 times more likely to catch TB from another cow than it is from any wildlife infection. So eradication or a journey to freedom from any disease, it's effectively a numbers game. Nothing we do is 100% effective, but do it all together and you then start to win at pace.
The vaccine that's going to be used is the BCG cattle vaccine, but that is currently banned in many countries, including the EU. So how can we be sure that they'll be able to accept beef or dairy from vaccinated animals?
From the point of view of international trade, then alongside the BCG vaccine, the differentiational test that we call the DIVA test, which basically tells the difference between an animal that's been infected and an animal that's been vaccinated, that's pivotal. And that trial work is going well. But internationally, and with regards to the World Organization of Animal Health, there is a great deal of interest in what we're doing, because if they could immunize their cattle, then their problem is vastly reduced if you just get less disease.
There's an emphasis on biosecurity on farms, but also increased freedoms for farmers to test their animals. So what does that mean in practice on the farm? How much leeway should there be for farmers to choose what happens to their animals?
Statutory surveillance testing will still remain a backbone. We're also intending to introduce gamma interferon blood testing in new breakdown herds, particularly in the high-risk area, where we know that there is, particularly in big dairy herds, there's embedded disease that we're not totally rooting out. But in addition to that, in order to give farmers more authority over how they manage their herds, then the aim is to allow ancillary tests whereby they can use those to manage TB risk within their herds themselves more. And it's a question of allowing farmers that flexibility, as opposed to in the past, if it wasn't a government test, it couldn't happen.
Badger culling is being phased out. In fact, there's only one badger cull remaining at the moment. That was a manifesto pledge by the government. Do you think bovine tuberculosis can be eradicated without controlling wildlife?
Yes. That's why I've always been so keen to push for vaccination, because if you achieve immunity in your cattle herd, then actually, regardless of whether the source of TB, potential source of TB infection is another cow or a badger or a deer or whatever, the animal is protected. So effective vaccination takes all the heat and politics out of the debate and allows us to focus on the pathogen.
The strategy, though, involves badger vaccination as well. Why do we need that then? If what you've just said that actually it doesn't matter if there's disease in badgers if you've got the whole herd vaccinated.
No vaccine is 100% effective. So you won't get 100% immunity. And it comes back to the fact that there is no silver bullet with TB. There never was a silver bullet. Culling wasn't the silver bullet, and not culling wasn't. If you want less disease everywhere, then actually, if you've got in the high-risk area populations of badgers that are heavily infected with TB, it is logical also to vaccinate them and reduce that TB load. So it's a matter of looking at every part of the environment and seeing where you can reduce the disease.
Do you really believe we can be bovine TB free in England by 2038, which is the target?
Yes, I genuinely do, but that's not just going to happen. We haven't got the time for any political argument about the past and what was valid and what wasn't. We've got a set of tools now in the box that will do this, but it's going to require a really brutal focus on delivery and some real energy and commitment. That's why we co-designed the whole thing, so that we've got something that everyone can believe in and gives farmers hope, so they think, well, it's worth engaging with because I can see a future where we'll be free of it. So, yeah, it's going to be a bumpy ride, but we'll get there on time if we've got the guts.
John Cross, chair of the steering group for the government's Bovine TB Partnership for England. If you're a farmer and you have views about the proposal for a cattle vaccine, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us. It's farmingtoday@bbc.co.uk. That's all from us. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Rebecca Rooney. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.